my great pleasure to introduce you Professor Uwe Bruckner, which is the co-founder of ATELIER BRÜCKNER. ATELIER BRÜCKNER is an office which stay in Stuttgart, and is an office which is quite totally devoted to exhibition design. They do also architecture, other things, but we can say that the main activity of ATELIER BRÜCKNER is exhibition design, or better, as Uwe Bruckner says, scenography. And in this field of activity, they work from 1997, and they have become one of the most important office in the world, and one of the office we look at because they have always worked to be innovative, to define new parameters and different level of communication, and of creation of different way to be narrative and to be engaging with the work of exhibition design. They've worked in quite all the world. It's a really big office, about quite 100 people that work inside, and often Uwe Brückner, that I have the chance to meet other times, explained to me that they speak over 20 different languages in their office. That means they are a really international office, and they have won over 200 national and international awards in their field activity. And the classical slogan of ATELIER BRÜCKNER is form, follow, content, and this is the perfect resuming of their way to make their works in the exhibition fields. But I don't want to spend any time over, and so I present you Uwe Brückner. Just I would like to say that Uwe is also a great friend of mine, so I'm really happy to have the chance to meet him again, even in this strange virtual situation, but we hope that the future will be different, or maybe just a little more normal. Uwe, thank you so much to be with us today.
Thank you, Marco, for the invitation. And also before I start and say hello, I also would like to thank Filippo, the helping hand in the background, who helps us to make this session happen and possible. So, hello everybody. Come stai? So unfortunately my Italian is not good enough to do the lecture in Italian, so I prefer English. But I'm very much attached to this country, not only by traveling. I also own a house in Liguria, and I'm very happy to say that I'm also proud to have a friend like Marco, with whom I already shared one common project, a project of my Basel students and Marco's students from Politecnico Mantova. This was the project Palazzo Ducale, and I have very many good thoughts and experiences that I can reflect on this projects that we did together. And I very strongly hoping that this corona epidemic ebbs down very soon, and we can meet in person and physically to go for more projects together. Okay, this was the introduction. I hope everybody can understand me quite well and see me quite well. I'm in my office home, so I'm not at home in my office, but in my studio, which is just hosting me at the moment. So my assistant is not there. I'm in what I call splendid isolation. So I can't compare the situation with Marcus and Philippus in Milan. We have a quite leisurable shutdown in Stuttgart, so we are not supposed to go out and no traveling. And of course, museums and theaters and cinemas are closed, also the churches. But the restrictions are quite loose compared to yours, not so strict. And our governments, the local city government, the state government, and also the national government, they pretend saying that this is our responsibility to behave in a social and community way, rather than in a individual and egocentric way. So, but I can say it's very nice at the moment in Stuttgart. We have almost summer temperatures of 23 degrees today. I don't know what is in Milan, similar, I guess. And the only contact that I do have is my home office and my office home. So I'm just going back and forth every morning, which also relieves me a bit from the family stress at home and gives me the opportunity to talk to you in peace and in silence. Okay, so let's start the lecture, which is divided in three parts. First, I wanted to introduce you to what scenography is about. I think it's about storytelling. So the so-called narrative plays a role since, let's say, 2000, which started with the expo in Hanover, when Dr. Martin Roth implemented the term scenography in the German-spoken area and called those designers who were asked to design a pavilion at the Expo 2000 in Hanover to call themselves scenographers, or he called them scenographers. Our coming out and our public approach with a new kind of conceptual method and philosophy was the Titanic exhibition that you see in the background. So the Titanic exhibition was all about storytelling, but it's also about the space. So it's possible to make space talk with scenography. What you see in the background is the so-called cycle bowl. This was our pavilion at the Expo 2000 in Hanover, which caused a lot of interest in more than 1 million people. And it was a sustainable building, I think the only one at the entire Expo. It was able to be recycled 100% after the use. But it's also about illusion. So scenography is not only relevant in real aesthetics, but also in virtual images. And this was in a project never realized. A reincarnation in full size of a sunken Chinese junk. Imagine you have a projection, so underneath you have a floor with all the remainings, so withdrawn from the debris field of the sunken ship, and above you have a complex system of screens that enable you to see the reincarnation. So the reconstruction of the vessel in full size, in this case 14 by 12 meter, even in a slide 3-dimensional view. And of course it's about objects, to make them talk, to let them tell their story, not the story told by curators, but to install and to stage objects as if they were able to talk for themselves. So this is the National Maritime Museum in Amsterdam with the figureheads. These are these wooden figures placed on the bow or on the stern of both on the old sailing ships till the 19th century. Of course, it's about objects and their use and their meaning and their relevance according to the relevance of the objects and how the objects had been used. and collected. This example shows the aesthetic presentation of archaeological findings of the National Museum of Switzerland, the Landesmuseum in Zurich, and there you have both. You have the objects in authentic reality. You have a setting according to meaning and narrative that is printed out on the left-hand side, and you have a sliding monitor with which you can slide over the objects and explore them even in 3D and in a deeper way to extract information that only curators have. And of course it's about messages. In the background you see the information center of the European Parliament in Brussels. This is the only exhibition that I know that is hosting all European languages, so US, Italian, or French, or German people. You could visit this exhibition and you can walk through with your own mother tongue. So it's an exhibition in 24 languages and 4 sign languages, covering all European spoken languages. And it's about things that are even more sophisticated in their power of what they were used for. Like in this case, if we have time, I will show you this project. It's the famous Ricordi collection, actually in the National Library in Milan, in the 4th basement below. And this is depicting a accessible orchestra pit with the scores that were used for by the instruments according a classical setting in an orchestra to perform, in this case, 5 different operas. So in this case I'm talking about to make paper sound, so even amateurs can understand how a score was composed. And it's of course about atmosphere, so light, temperature, sound plays a major role, like in this chamber of the Titanic exhibition in 1997. And it's about awareness, so you can attract the people, you can scare them, you can accelerate them in movement, or you can slow them down, or you can make them to reflect the moment. In this case, the Ethnological Museum Rautenstoch Just in Cologne, and this is the transit from life to death. So that's a corridor that it's dealing with a certain emotion from the both sides of life and death. And what we developed over the years is the withdrawal, the retrievement of information. I call this information on demand. If the visitors are allowed and able to choose where, when, and how much information they want to withdraw. In this case, on the right-hand side, you see a classical setting of sculptures like artifacts, and there's a little tag attached to the showcase, and whenever you touch it, which is this tag is a B metal, so you close the circuit, and then the information appears from the backside via lighting from behind. Not to forget, and this is very important, I will later on reflect on this more intensively, is the visitor, the recipient, the spectator, the customer, or the addressee. Very often we designers forget about for whom we are designing, not for us, believe me. We are designing for our customers, for our clients, for our visitors in museums. So it's wise to change position from time to time, step out of the footprints of a designer and take the position of the recipients, the addressees, and you will find out that designing is also worthwhile to approach from a completely different perspective. Yes, and not to forget the perception. One of my sayings is start thinking from the end. Start thinking from the end means that you don't start from just the scratch and develop things from nothing to everything, But if you have, for example, a drama, a Shakespeare drama, or you have a partitura from Puccini, you don't start from the sketch, because there you have a written score, and the written score or the composition tells you how to perform it. But there is an extreme variety of possibilities to interpret it over the last 200, 300, or even 500 years, if we go back to Shakespeare. And that means that if you start thinking from what you want to achieve, so what the perception should be, you could turn around the process of creativity from the earliest beginning. And this is also an example that I will show later on. The first cubic cinema in the world, which was built for and during the Expo 2010 in Shanghai. And it's all about innovation. So sometimes you have the need or the idea to create something that is actually not existing before, or you're looking for an equivalent, for an expression, a more artistic translation of a content, a message, or installation. In this case, it's the Hyundai Motor Show in South Korea, and you see the making of. The idea was to have a fluid sculpture that can express both the dynamic of the company, the dynamic and high-end technical value of the objects, in this case products, and a system that reflects and behaves accordingly to their users or customers. So this sculpture has different modes. One mode is the auto-active mode, as you can see. So it's a nice setting of these pillars that it can move up and down and create sculptures. But it's also a reactive system. So while you're passing by as a visitor in the reactive mode, this wave is referring to you, is reacting on you. Let me see if I can show it to you, if it's part of it. Yeah. So this is the auto-active mode, and now this is the reactive mode. That means a tracking system captures you as a visitor, in this case this young lady, and dedicates to her one of these waves. And you see even two-person meeting there. The waves mingle, overlay each other, and they are reacting in real time. So this technical sculpture is starting to behave like a real character. And this was the idea, to show that technique is not only for the technical sake, but also has enormous poetic potential. And you might ask me where all these ideas come from, or where the tendency comes from. This is because I have three professions. So I'm a carpenter, I'm a regular architect, registered architect, and I'm a stage designer. So I studied stage design at the Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart with Jürgen Rose, and there I was intrigued by opera. So actually I'm a rock and roller. I'm coming out of the era of rock and roll. But over my studies and during this intrigue with opera, I became an opera lover over the years, and I'm using the power of opera and the dramatic potentials in operas and compositions for my and our designs. So after this excursion of what scenography would exist of, I would like to state that scenography is a holistic, integrative, multidisciplinary synesthetic, so dealing with all the senses, and content-consistent design philosophy. It combines logic and magic. And of course, the logic is the technical aspect or the function, and the magic is the poetry, the surprise, the mesmerizing effect that you create as a designer. All the projects that I showed you already, and later on, are not achievable by just one single person, you can imagine. Therefore, I would like to introduce briefly the ATELIER Brückner. So this company or the ATELIER that stands behind this philosophy follows content and is working according to my creative structure, the methodology to create concepts and projects like this. We are located in Stuttgart in a former production place on the second floor of this T-shaped building. As Marco already said, we are an international team and multidisciplinary as well. So I think at the moment we are between 100 and 120. So this is a chart from last year, 2019, when we were 120. We cover 12 to 13 different disciplines, and our staff members are coming from 25 different nations and speak more than 20 different languages. We are present or active in various countries with projects that you can see here on the chart, and all the projects are driven by the power of form follows content. So all our designs derive from an intensive involvement in the content that is given or developed, that is given to us or developed by us ourselves, and from there we start to find the design and not the other way around. And this is a lot of try and error, back and forth, as you can imagine, and requires steps that have altering powers and alternative proposals. So what you see here is the GS Caltex Pavilion of the Expo 2012 in South Korea that I will show later. And here you see the making of. So in the front you have 4 different models of 4 different proposals, real alternative proposals. In the background you see these slightly light whitish sketches next to the term GS Caltex Pavilion, next right of the title, and then the translation into graphic design by our in-house graphic designers, and then this went to the filmmakers, Mark Tamsik and his team, to Berlin to then execute a 360 degrees panoramic projection that we will see later on. Already mentioned my philosophy that is called form follows content, but there is more about, and out of this form follows content I developed the so-called creative structure with the recipient, the addressee, the visitor in the center, and powered by 5 parameters. We start with the first one, so the content or storytelling parameter, the space as a parameter, as I already mentioned, to make space talk or to let space talk, the objects or the products, no matter if it's a cultural project or a more commercial orientated one. It's the recipient, and you see the recipient in the center, and it's the dramaturgy that frames everything and brings everything together and gives it a structure, a choreography, and a curve of suspense. So it means that the creative structure can be seen as a navigational system. So my students and of course my staff members are trained in this way, and I already did courses together with Marco's class, and we discussed and agreed upon that we do what I call a solidarity teaching. So I share my experiences and he shares his experiences, and other colleagues share their experiences with us, and we want to set up a European community of scenographers, as we did already in the early 2000s, and we sort of want to revitalize this network, and this is more or less the initial contribution, my lecture to this. And there I can introduce you guys, the young colleagues, to my kind of creative structure. As I said, it's a navigational system, a creative process, a creative method, and it's organized in creative phases. So these are the four aspects of how to achieve it and how to execute it. These four phases are consistent in four pillars: the project structure, the project phases, the parameters of scenography, and the tools of scenography. And this is just a glimpse of what it is about. So this is the project phases, the content and proposal phase, the concept and the draft phase, the planning and prototyping, and the production and realization. So you know this is a regular setup of any kind of proposals and project dealing with scenography. To achieve this, actually, you only need four answers for four questions. And I'm always chasing my people around with four questions, and everybody should be able to shoot these answers just out of the hip. This is the title, the subtitle, the content, and the message. You should be able to describe any kind of projects. And by the way, film students are able to do so. So they are learning this in the first semester among the lessons that are dealing with the plot. So young film students are able to describe their intended movie or the film concept with a title, with a subtitle, with a content description, what they call plot, in less than 4 pages A4, and a message in less than 4 sentences. You see, this is a chalkboard, a blackboard at our university in Basel, where I'm the co-founder of the Institute for Interior Design and Scenography. So what is the design able to achieve? This question and the answers for this question are based on the 5 design parameters: the object, the content, the space, the recipient, and the dramaturgy or routing, as I showed you earlier in this sketch. And let's start with the content. According to my philosophy, form follows content. We always start with the content. And this is a typical sketch that I did, and what I can propose to you, what I can suggest, assume, and ask you for is sketch, sketch, sketch. It's the easiest, the fastest, and the most proper way to express one's ideas, and to hold them, to keep them. Because very often you have a glimpse of an idea in the morning, in the evening, while you're talking to someone else, or you're just driving through the city, riding your bike, and all of a sudden you have an idea and you lose it. So according to research projects, while losing 99% of our ideas, if we don't note them down or sketch them down, we only use 1% of the power of our creativity. So I trained myself to sketch everything and bring everything down to paper immediately. And meanwhile, so over the last 25 years, I collected more than 10,000 sketches. And this is a typical sketch, very complex, as you can see. It's all about content. But I created files for it to make it more easy and understandable. And now you see that these 4 questions And the 5 parameters, they are interlinked, yeah, like your hands in the fingers, and it's always the same system. So I was always looking for a structure that was not substituting another structure not to make complex things more complex, but to make them easier. And you see that's a quite easy file. On the left-hand side, you have these black boxes with title, subtitle, content, and message. And additional, you have a prologue and an epilogue, which actually formally comes from literature or from drama. There's always a prologue or preludio, and the epilogue or finale, if you refer to compositions. And what I add at the end is the sort of self-perception. So how do you want that your concept is seen, perceived, or interpreted later on? So you also could start from the end, as I already said. The order is not important, but the substance is important, and the file to the right, so the columns to the right, is just how to achieve it, the way how to proceed. Yeah, and I always try to illustrate it with an example. I already mentioned the information system center of the European Parliament in Brussels. This is how the system reacts on you. It's a reactive system, and it approaches you, it talks to you in your mother tongue. Whenever you identified yourself with one of these smartphones, the system knows that you are either a German-spoken or a French-spoken person, like on the left. So the next parameter is the so-called object parameter. And you can classify objects, you can judge or research the objects according to their appearance, so the size, the color, the shape, the layers of meaning. You select one and not the other one, so selection and analysis plays a role, or the role in the exhibition, so where to position the object, just at the beginning of the exhibition, at the end, or in a collective showcase where you have more than 1,000 or only 10 or only one object, and how to stage it, so with light, with sound, with the ambience around, with the atmosphere, and so on. And this is another sketch to depict how you could approach it. So imagine you have one object in the center of your thinking and as the target of your creativity, and then you look at this, and this is what this sketch wants to mention, to illustrate. And if you look at the same one and the same object from 8 different perspectives, which are ruled or dedicated to 8 different aspects or questions, then you have a multiple, more dimensional view on the object. And you know, as I also said, you have the advantage of walking around the story. This is the difference between exhibition and cinema and theater. In an exhibition, you can walk around the story. And an example for it, this is the Archaeological Museum in Herne, and you see 2 skull plates of pieces, fragments, and in the background you see the computer tomographic reconstruction of the skulls according to the remainings found from Neanderthal and Homo sapiens for the first time. Let's have a look at the third parameter, the so-called space parameter. Well, actually, it's very present and it's very normal and it's very obvious, but to be honest, it's an underestimated parameter, because it's only mostly, space is only used as a container where you set something, where you leave something, or where you stage something, but it's very often underestimating in terms of that the space itself can talk to you or can create atmospheres, helping you to get a much easier, more attractive access to certain subjects, themes, or collection. So I divide it in 4 sub-parameters, so the physical space, this is the dimension, the surfaces, the material, and so on. The atmospheric space, so this is about what the lighting atmosphere is, the temperature, the sound in the space, and also what sound you make as a visitor, or sounds that are coming from talking, from projections, and so on. The narrative space is what do you want to tell with the space. So is space able to communicate with you? Of course, yes, it is. And how to achieve this, we will see some examples later. And the specialities, since I studied stage design and was involved in dramaturgy, the dramatized space, or the choreography of space and the choreographical order of spaces. So it matters what you see first and experience last in a space. It matters where you enter and where you leave the space. And this kind of parcours or route through the exhibition matters a lot in terms of the story you or the curators want to tell, and the perception from the position of the recipient. Yeah, and you see, this is the cycle ball. This was our pavilion at the Expo 2000 in Hanover, and this collected all the different parameters in an idealistic way, and this space with a real tornado in it, as you can see, was talking to the people, changed its character several times an hour, so could change from a greenhouse building to a black box in less than 8 minutes, could host this real tornado that was rising out of a screen, a central screen in the bottom, and was hosting 1,000 people at the same time, being mesmerized twice an hour by this tornado. The fourth parameter is dedicated to the recipient, and this is even a lost power that usually is only reflected after the opening, the so-called evaluation. So the analysis of how an exhibition works and how the visitors behave in there is something usually that is done after the opening. And if you're a smart designer, you can use this beforehand as a design tool, and therefore you can ask yourself what kind of types of visitors you expect. So are these addressees, spectators, observers, do they have an active role or a passive role? So what kind of visitors are they, the so-called target groups, the age, the gender, and so on. And the classification, are these local people or are tourists coming from over the place? Then you might design it in a different way. Imagine we as Western people from Central Europe, if we would not be able to address it to local people, who would not be able to design something in Asia or Africa or even South America, because it's a different local culture, and we need not only to reflect it, but also work with it, to work with local powers, with colleagues there that have a much better and more intensive feeling of their own environment than we can have. And as I already mentioned, the target group, so is it children, adults, elderly people, couples, families that you expect in the museum or exhibition. Yeah, so, and again, just an example how you could cover this, also with sketches. So I did a series of sketches just demonstrating if there is a shift of interest and power, in this case, from the space to the object. So if the object is the authentic object is the main attraction, so this, what I call this diamond of suspense, orientates more to the objects or more to other aspects or parameters. And just as an example for it, to deal with this aspect of the recipient as a design parameter is this love.com. It was a temporary exhibition about love, flirting and meeting and marriage and divorce and all that. And what you can see is that the visitors had these pink glasses, and only with the pink glasses you could read the storytelling. So the actually messages were hidden in a novel. So the entire walls were printed with a novel in red, and the messages were located in between. It's called palimpsest, so writing between the lines or reading between the lines. And this was only possible with the pink glasses. So whenever you had the glasses on, yeah, you could read the messages because the background turned red and left over the message in green. Just a very simple idea and very effective. So this was a low budget project, but it was extremely popular. Coming to the last parameter, the dramaturgy. So I was already introducing to you the choreographed space and the choreographed order of spaces. So it's not only the space itself, but also a couple of spaces, so a number of spaces that follow after another. It's also important with which room you start and with which room you end. And maybe in the background you can see some of the sketches that I did with my students, illustrating what it means if the entrance is not the regular door that you expect, but the entrance is through the window, or you cut a hole in the ceiling or in the floor and enter the exhibition room from underneath or from the top. Yeah, and it's also possible to sketch things that immaterial, that abstract. So dramaturgy is an abstract aspect or parameter, and this is the sketch, or the sketch tries to cope the ramp system of the BMW museum in Munich that I'm briefly going to show you. And this is an example how you can use this parameter of dramaturgy. So you see the content on the top, you see the content of the Information Center of the European Parliament as it was given to us, and below the more colorful boxes, this is how we were dealing with this. So we took the content and organized the content into the parkour. So the parkour is the entire surface that you can wander through. We integrated 2 new stairs to offer a round course. Round courses in exhibitions are much better than detours. And so this was our depiction of how this route, how the dramaturgy could look like. And I think this little animation, so this is now 10 years old, was also responsible for this winning entry in the international competition. Another example is the more static depiction of routes and dramaturgy. So you see 3 routes there. You have a short route that is covering the main aspects of an exhibition. You have a, this is 1.5 hours, so the regular visiting time of a museum, the average visiting time, and the one in between, the second from the top, is an enlargement. So we have more excursions in more deeper collection. And if you would visit, in this case, if you would visit the entire museum, you would need at least 6 hours to spend there if you wanted to see everything. Yeah, and the instrument for dramaturgy is the partitura, or the score. And here you see the score of the first cubic cinema ever been realized, and it's too complex to illustrate it, but it gives you a glimpse how it's organized. So you have from a dramatic curve on top to a color code and a time code on the bottom in between. You have the sketches integrated, the moods, and even the images that were standing for certain scenes. So in original, this partitura was 1 meter high and 6 meters long. And this version, you see, I hope you can see it on your monitor, was all the corrections. So a partitura is something very vivid. So it's not just a printout of what you have thought and then that's it, but it's a working tool. So all the corrections went into this partitura, and the partitura changed constantly. It's me state another important classification of modern scenography. I think there's no other creative discipline that recourses so much multifaceted integrative range of instruments for designing space as scenography. Scenography instrumentalizes the tools of theater, film, the fine arts to create unmistakable spatial dramaturgies. So this means that you are using all these sources to create a proper and exciting scenography. And as I would like to repeat, it depends on the 5 parameters. Usually all 5 parameters play a role in a sophisticated scenography. Sometimes the focus is more on the object or more on the space, even more on the recipient. So if it's more an interactive or reactive system, or sometimes it's all about storytelling and the objects play just a more illustrative role. So in total, and you can find this in my book, Scenography 2, I think Marco already introduced you to it, and I will share with you a list of literature and a list of films that might be interesting for you as young scenographers, and Marco will share it with you. So this is the entire process, various steps of the so-called creative structure. So it starts somewhere with a briefing or with a dramaturgy or with a score, and it ends up in a program. And while you are proceeding through the creative structure, you deal with the parameters, you deal with tools that you use, tools like graphic design, light, sound, media, film, video, and so on. And very often, at least this is my specialty, you depict it in a partitura. So this is the right end with a curve, the dramatic curve in it. And finally, after the opening of the exhibition or the museum, it's still a question what kind of program you are going for. Everybody with me? Are you still there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't lose you. Yeah. Okay, good. So this was part 2. This was the methodology. I mean, it was a very quick flight through the process, and I now want to illustrate this with if you are not too tired. Is it okay if I continue?
Personally, I'm not tired, so I hope that this is the same for all the students.
Okay, good. I quickly go through some of the examples before we start the discussion. I wanted to start with the Titanic exhibition 1997, which was the first of its kind, driven and based on a modern scenography. So then it was not defined, but I had the feeling that I could combine all the different skills that I went through. So the carpentry, so the making of the production, the architecture, so the feeling for space and dimension, and stage design, so the translation of content or stories or dramas into space. And this was combined within this project, the Titanic exhibition, which took place in Hamburg, 1997, and draw attention to 1.5 million visitors in 1.5 years. So we had a lot of authentic objects. Actually, it was a object-driven or focused exhibition, although the press was telling that this was one of the first media designed exhibition, but what you can see is the reality. So 4/5 of the exhibition was just real things, like a reconstruction of the first class and a reconstruction of the third class, people traveling on the Titanic. You see the space for 4 people traveling in the immigrant class was the same size as the bathroom behind this door in the back of this luxury suite. And it was, of course, about the object that was drawn from the debris field in 3,800 meter depth in the Atlantic. And you see the objects even untreated in a glass container, in an aquarium on the right-hand side. So for the almost first time, objects were shown in an authentic status, not treated, but as they were found. And you see it's the same table like we used for the restored object in this water tank. In between, there were more artistically orientated and driven rooms or settings like this, the so-called champagne room, which just hosted a leather boot, obviously from a staff member of the Titanic ship members, and 6 originally bottled champagne bottles here, just in a dialectic setting opposite to each other. We had a ice wall there projecting footage of icebergs from that time, from the 1910s. And what you see here is that the visitors, these more than 1 million visitors, left their traces, their hand prints there, which was a very poetic thing. This was not intended, nobody told them to do so, but the visitors did. And this was like a contribution to all those who couldn't make it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and on the right-hand side, you see a very early interactive station. Oh my God, this was very basic, very analog. It was just light, and you could switch several layers that were lit from the side to illustrate the journey of the wreckage of the Titanic. Another artistic room, a broken flute, as a metaphor for all these different languages traveling on the Titanic. And one of the highlights, the so-called room of silence. So there was no description, it was just objects in an absolutely blacked out room, and the room was acoustically insulated, so while you were walking you did not make any noise. It was causing the maximum respect between the visitors and the objects on display. And directly after that is an overexposed, highly lit space. This was called the Myth Room, and this room was dedicated to the reflection after Titanic went down, and there was just one object in the center. It was the bell, most likely Frederick Fleet rang when he saw the iceberg. Sorry, I have to drink. And then you were working on gravel, and every visitor was causing a noise that was the kind of provocation for the reflection time after the Titanic sank. So this was mainly about storytelling. Let's come to the space, how space could talk and how space could interact and communicate with you. So this is the BMW headquarters in Munich, which was opened in 1972 for the Olympic Games in Munich. On the left-hand side, you see the so-called bowl, the old museum. At that time, it was a sensation in Europe. You can see inside the ramp system. It was very much inspired by the Guggenheim Museum in New York. And on the right-hand side, you see this four-cylindric tower is a metaphor for BMW. And in between, so this flat building in between, part of the building, the so-called West Wing, between the headquarters, the four-cylinder tower, and the bowl on the left-hand side, this was a former management part or hosting a cafeteria and meeting rooms and so on. And this was converted, or this was supposed to be converted in the museum. And to gain more space and to make it more attractive, because it was only 5,000 square meters reserved for us, we came up with the idea to lead the visitors through on different levels several times with the same room, but always with a different view, with a different perspective. And this was one of the earliest sketches, I think in 2006 or even 2005. And this is the result. So I switch back. This was the idea, and this was the result. It was almost realized according to the early sketches and the early ideas. And you see this ramp system leading the visitors through the central space, and you see these cubic volumes left and right of the ramps, and these so-called bodies, they were hosting, or they are hosting the collections, so the various themes. The speciality of the central space was the so-called media texture. So it looks like architecture if you stay there and the screen is going to a static mode, but actually the entire architecture is a screen. Then it was the largest indoor screen in Europe, 740 square meters, because behind the structure is all covered with LED bulbs. So 740 square meters of a screen, and what we wanted to achieve with it is to make the space move. So with this constellation, you are able to create a feeling for the visitors as if the space moves, but it doesn't. It's just an illusion for glimpses, and this is can be achieved by activating the screen, so the spatial screen, to create moments of movement that idealistically reflect in the bodies of the cars. And you might know this sculpture based on my idea to create something to visualize the step from a sketch on a piece of paper over a clay model to the real size model of a new type of car. Yeah, and this was a try and error, forth and back, and we could not really get to a conclusion, to a satisfying conclusion. So this was nets and papers and all kind of materials we wanted to move and to let them position itself to the shape of any car ever designed by BMW. And finally, the colleagues from Art&Com in Berlin came up with a revolutionary idea not to create a net, but only use the junctions of a net as points, and the rest, the missing rest, is by our brains. So finally, you have real shapes there of cars, being able to illustrate any kind of designs ever done by BMW. Of course, there are real things, and the story of the real things, the very famous car, I had one when I was young, Isetta, a front load mini car. I've heard that they are trying to revitalize this character of car for a electric with an electric driven motor. And of course, the task was to revitalize the old museum, the so-called ball. So we reconstructed it in its original size and appearance, including these information bulbs in the foreground. And the only thing that we add was the content, so the slogans of BMW over the last 60 years being added onto the railing of this ramp on top. There is a huge space with a panorama setting. Originally, the architect Kai Schwanzer wanted to have a panoramic projection around, and could not achieve it because at that time this was analog projectors only possible, and now with the digital age we could posthum fulfill his wish to create a so-called symphony around 180 meter long cylindric projection. So quickly introduction to this space. Now you see the screen in action. So you can put on this screen whatever you want. Of course, most of the time cars are running over, historic cars, but there's also this mood of movement. You can use it at any kind of VIP shows and events. The media texture. I showed you the so-called sculpture, and there's a window on the floor where you can look through to the lower level, which is connected. So one cube is always dedicated to one theme. Okay. Let's come to the next one. I'm already over time, and I don't want to over-exaggerate your patience. I think you had a long day, and I only want to share two more projects with you before the discussion, if there's some energy left with you. This is the National Maritime Museum in Amsterdam, and I show this for this parameter of objects. It's an historic building from medieval ages, and it's fantastically and mesmerizingly covered with a new roof. So this is the central courtyard, which was open space formerly, and since the opening it's covered with this fantastic room, and you see the shadows of the construction behaves like a sea chart, so like the meridians on a sea chart. So the very smart idea. Even engineering can be scenography. And just a glimpse of our work, which was mainly dedicated to the collection, so ship models collection, for example. And the fantastic idea was the storytelling of the curators that said, oh, you must know this tender was a tender of a famous sailing ship, but how can we transport this to the audience? How can we convey all these stories? We created a sliding monitor which depicts the model with a camera behind the monitor, and then you can activate several levels of information to withdraw the stories told by the curators. This is an option. In this case, this ship model behind was the tender of a famous sailing ship that was in action in several movies, as you can see. Yeah, the highlight, this is according to the visitors' books and the critics, the highlight, or one of the highlights of the exhibition is this collection of navigational instruments. So most of you young guys don't know what these navigational instruments were for and how they were used, because you have your GPS system on your smartphone, but in former times many of these instruments were used for navigation. For example, navigation with the stars. So in the back you see star constellation, so star figures with these, where the bulbs in a higher resolution, in a more gleaming way than all the others. So this star constellation could be used for navigation during the night, and these instruments stand for it, and the stories with it. You can activate on the left-hand side. You see these little tray or this little gleaming panel. If you touch it, again, you can withdraw the information on demand. So you decide where and when you want to go deeper into the subject or to have more illustration of the object, as it usually can have, just as within an auratic setting. So famous collection of globes. It's hosted by the museum, and globes are, for me, globes are fascinating because they depict an entire world, a very complex world in a small scale, but usually you only can see one half or a bit more. You have to knee down to see the southern hemisphere, and to correct this and offer a tool to explore the globes in a more holistic way, we created a digital globe. So this is a trackball that you can turn, and while you turn and press a button, you also can travel through time. So from the earliest scanned globe to the youngest one, and then you can see how the survey, how the research, and how the experiences about the seafarers, the travelers and the captains collected informations and corrected the sea charts and the globes over the time. And finally, you have a GPS station. I think the latest adjustment with this interactive ball shows also integrates the GPS system. Okay, now we make a jump to a more commercial project. This is the Macallan, so this is the forelast project that I'm going to show. Macallan, the famous whiskey company, which started a new location, a new distillery in the north, in the Highlands of Scotland, and it's a fantastic building integrated into the nature by Roger Stirk and Harbour architects from London. And it offers a route of 240 meters. So this is the length. This is the length of the entire distillery. So you can visit the distillery only via guided tours, because it's too dangerous of the angel share. So there's always alcohol in the air. You're not supposed to carry a smartphone or a lighter or something like this with you, because this could really cause serious trouble. And you see the parcours through the distillery on the right-hand side, 240 meters long, and you on the left-hand side in these yellowish circles, this is the exhibition that you can visit. One of the exciting views is this distillery in the back, and you have an interactive station that illustrates the process of distilling by using this hand rail and operating this interactive station. So all the attractions and all the exhibition areas, all the installation, the staging of the various content was discussed beforehand with the curators and the clients, with our teams, and you see again sketches, in this case the so-called wood story. So this was the sketch, and then this was the realization, and it's all about the cask making. So the wood that is cut in Spain and Portugal, it's a special oak, and how it's fired and prepared to become a cask for the whiskey. The second station, for example, and this is also how you can see how I sketch, is always mostly A3 paper that I'm carrying with me in loose files, and then sketch wherever I am. So this is from somewhere in the world, a sketch that was then sent to the team. In this case, for the blending or for the whiskey story, which is introduced by this collection of the different whiskey colors, that plays a major role. Also, not only for the value, but also for the taste. In this case, you can taste different ingredients, different smells that were added to the special whiskey, and this is a glimpse of the whiskey stories inside. So the blending is shown on this interactive table, and around you have a circular panoramic movie that illustrates the entire process of whiskey making. So periodically it starts. It's easy to travel because it's a guided tour. So maximum 12 people are in one team, hosted by a local expert of the company. Yes, and finally, I want to invite you to travel a bit on what I think sophisticated scenography. This is a collection of whiskey casks. So for example, if you have the money, you can buy one of these casks, I don't know, 300 liters of whiskey that matures there all the time. So this the cylindric room here, designed by the architects, hosts 5 lines of casks that are in a like in an archive, like in a disposal, and they mature there. And if you want to, you travel up there to Scotland, and then you do a whiskey tasting. This is in this cylindric central room, which is completely separated, tightly separated from the archive. Again, there is angel share in the air, so alcohol in the air, and you can dine there and you can taste your own whiskey that is coming from one of these casks. And my idea was to create a symphony, a whiskey symphony, which means on purpose these 5 lines were representing the 5 lines of a score. So remember again the score composition, and the faces of the casks, so the front cover of the cask you see here with the Macallan logo on it, were supposed to be the notes. So the idea covers the concept of a score, a 3-dimensional cylindric panoramic score, and each of the cask is a note. And by putting light on the cask faces, you can compose music, or you can write music, and in reverse you can sort of follow the music written by light on the cask faces. So that sounds complex. It's a bit complex, but in the perception, then you will see it in a short movie. It's fantastic. So you as a visitor, it's a VIP visitor, you are standing in the cylinder in the center, and around you this symphony takes place using the faces of the cask as notes. So short glimpse of light on it, it's a short note, and long light on it, it's a long note. So it's easy even for amateurs, for non-musicians, to follow this composition. Yeah, the floor and the ceiling are covered with mirrored glass, so that there's a infinity prolongation of the number of casks, which is a metaphor for there are many more casks in archives. They're maturing in the company, so this is just a cross section of a very exclusive selection. So this is the corridor where you enter this central cylindric room, the dining room, and around you have the composition. And this is some images that I selected from a large number, showing you how it's used by the colleagues from London. So light designers from Jason Groot, light designers from London were chosen to do this installation according to my idea, using it as a partitura. So. So there's a large archive. All these whiskey bottles you saw on the left-hand side are historic ones. And this is the parkour. It starts with the initial setting there, the old Elgin house where all began. Then the new distillery. You see how these interactive stations illustrate the several steps of production. So there's real spirit running through it. The wood story with the different destinations where the wood comes from and the different character. This is what I showed you previously. The advantage was to create box-in-the-box system because it's an open house with a lot of glass facade and you need to control it. Therefore, we created cylindric exhibition spaces to be able to do these projections anytime during the day. So it's a very nice and harmonic combination of a daylight exhibition and a black box installation. Now this is the symphony. The whiskey story. And of course the product. So that's not a museum, that's a commercially orientated project. Therefore, the product is the final object to show. So, and this is very quickly the last project, and this project is one of my favorite one because it features that's opera, 200 years of Italian opera, and it derives from the famous Ricordi collection. So Ricordi was the inventor of the modern score printing, and he found his company in 1806 at the Scala in Milano, and since then the Ricordi is more or less controlled the opera market, especially had under contract most of the composers, almost all Italian composers and many others, international composers as well. For me, it was a highlight in my career, coming from opera, to be asked to do the design for this temporary exhibition, to first of all in all times show the recording collection to the public. Unfortunately, it did not happen in Milan, but it happened in Brussels. In 2008, and this is a very quick tour through 1,500 square meters of fascinating staged exhibition. So actually it was more than an exhibition, it was like travel through an opera, hosting 5 different operas. And this is was the entrance. You see the sketch, and this is the realization. So we were working through several curtains, 7 curtains. So everything had a meaning. So every number, every setting was composed according to the operas or to the history of opera. And this is the model of the entire parcours. So I don't know if you can see my my mouse. No, I can't see the mouse, so you can see it. So you start from the center below. You see the curtains. In the model it was 4 curtains, in reality 7 curtains. On the left-hand side you continued with the libretto. So this is the storytelling, the text. And then go to the partitura. Go to the partitura. And there was a partitura 1 and 2. So the first partitura is the treasure box with really rare, authentic originals from Puccini, Donizetti, Bellini, and Verdi. So all manuscripts, so originals, they are on display for the first time. They were allowed to travel and been shown for the first time ever. Usually they are in the National Archive, in the National Library in Milan. And the second part of the partitura is this walkable or accessible orchestra pit. Then Scenografia, which is the stage design. On the right-hand side, costumes, or voce e costumi, so the costumes and the characters representing the voices and vice versa. And last but not least, the performance, or rappresentazione. This was a movie 270 degrees movie captured at the National Opera in Stuttgart. So let's go quickly through. I just selected some of the settings. This is the orchestra pit, the idea of an interactive orchestra pit. So each of the scores here is covered by this cylindric loudspeaker suspending from the ceiling, and one of these loudspeakers only covered 60 centimeters in diameter. So standing in front of this score, you just could hear first violin, second violin, third violin, or more to the left, a trumpet, or even more to the left, a percussion instrument. So each instrument had its own loudspeaker related to the score on display. So actually the setting was like in a classical opera orchestra. And in the distance behind, you see a score there being conducted by this shadow of a rear conductor. So this was performed especially for the exhibition, and you could choose 5 different operas, and I just demonstrate one of it, so La Bohème, for example. And my idea was to make it possible that even amateurs can read a score. Usually only musicians can do. You see how a score looks like, very cryptic, very complex. For musicians, no problem, but for amateurs, almost impossible. And I wanted to open up a door, a window to this fantastic world of composition, also for regular people who have no skills in music. And you see this line, this red line, and the red line indicates which instruments are on or off. In this case, violin, viola, cello, and double bass are on, and all the others pause. And the shadow of the conductor is performing the the introduction of the instruments, so more are coming in, flute, piccolo, oboe, and so on, but still not the singers. So in the section below, Mimi and Rodolfo are mentioned. This is this famous scene of the duet of Mimi and Rodolfo, and even amateurs, visitors were waiting for Mimi to come. And now, listen. So Mimi came in, and the red line and the reddish depiction of the notes shows the notes that were just sung by the performer. So it was very easy even for amateurs to read a score and to listen to the performance of the score. The visitors had the choice of 5 different operas to select, which were conducted and performed lively by the National Orchestra of Czech Republic. Still waiting for Rodolfo. And so on. So I have to hurry up because it's already 1 hour and 20 minutes, my lecture. Also, Marco told me I only have 40 minutes for the lecture. I apologize, and I hope that you enjoy the overtime because I'm almost about to finish. So the final challenge was how to put an opera on display in a museum. Usually it's very boring. So you have some seats and you have a monitor there and you have headphones there, and then people are sitting there listening to music in a very often bad quality. So at home you can listen to the same opera in a much better quality, and it's not a substitute. It has nothing to do with the real performance in the opera. So to capture and to catch and to convey some of these goose skin moments in a real opera, I was always thinking of how can I transport the feeling of a real opera performance in the format of an exhibition, into a much more static format of exhibition. And this is one of the sketches that I did, and actually this is not a scenographic sketch, actually it's a sketch for the director, for the film directors, how to produce and how to use the film footage to create a holistic feeling of an opera performance. And the idea was not just to capture an opera. In this case, it's Verdi, Verdi's Aida at the National Opera in Stuttgart, but an interpretation, an artistic interpretation of the opera. So we were filming with 5 cameras simultaneously that were positioned on different spots, in front, on the sides, and behind the scenes. So there were 5 cameras positioned to capture a holistic image, so a 4-dimensional image of the opera while it was performed, to create glimpses and insights that you usually don't have. And this is how I perceive museum or exhibition. For me, exhibition and museum is a door opener to secret worlds that are usually closed for me as a normal a person or an amateur. And exhibitions, especially scenographic exhibitions and museums, open up these doors and give access to the audience to these secret worlds, in this case, to the making of an opera. And you see the setting, so you have the original score here in front, lined up. So this is the score, the partitura, Verdi's partitura for Aida. And then you have 3 projection screens, so 270 degrees, 2 at the sides and 1 in the front, even disrupted by a column in the center. So this was given space to us. I was very unhappy with it. I wanted to cut it out overnight, but of course it was impossible. It was a concrete column, so we had to arrange that installation around this column. You have 12 seats there, so moving, sliding, turning seats there, original opera seats, so that you could turn around and either focus on the right, left, or front side of the projection. And finally, I would like to introduce you to this performance. Oh. Unfortunately, this performance is not working. That's a shame. So something went wrong. Maybe it's a transformation mistake. Maybe during the discussion, I will search for the movie to serve you with this movie. So I deeply apologize, because this was meant to be the highlight of my lecture. And well, this is also an experience of distance teaching, that not everything happens on the spot. So I just finished the lecture with my statement that you have seen a lot of digital media and design mingled or connected to also physical settings. Therefore, I think that we are just at the beginning of an area, of a hybrid area, where we have real object, which is the essence of a collection or a museum, and we have media designs and media tools and media installations to create or to offer glimpses and access to secret, hidden information places and lost powers of objects and storytelling. So the digital will never fully replace the real. Idealistically, it will synchronize to create a dynamic hybrid. And I deeply believe in this dynamic hybrids, because I think it's not the virtual and the real, but the real and the virtual that interests the visitors. If possible, we designers, we scenographers, we allow to become the visitors involved in another narrative space that excites their attention and provokes their potential for interpretation. Very important that you don't tell the stories to a final end. You leave space for own individual interpretation. Due to the spatial narration, dramaturgy takes the place of the orientation and the imagination of the cognitive in the real space. Thank you very much.
So, dear Uwe, thank you so much for your fantastic lecture. I'm really sad because in a virtual classroom it's not possible to make an applause, but we do it in our head. And thank you so much for this fantastic journey in your idea and in your work. I've seen that there are some questions in the chat, that because the students have right not to interrupt you. I don't know if you can read the chat.
Yes, I can.
So there is the first question was by Maria.
Hello, I could ask the question in person if you prefer. Hello.
Hello.
I want to thank you, Professor, for this lesson because it was incredibly interesting. And my question maybe could be a little bit basic, but I wanted to ask you, how do you start a project? And with this, I mean, do you follow a first impression on maybe the object or the theme that you are you are supposed to do an exhibition, or do you rather collect as many information as possible on the subject and then maybe trying to combine this information? And I wanted to ask this, if there is an answer, a clear answer. Anyway.
Yeah. So according to my credo, form follows content. We always start to analyze deeply and extensively the subject that we are dealing with. So on one hand, we analyze the brief that we get from either for the competition or from after we won the competition, from the curators, that is more or less defining and depicting what kind of collection and what kind of storytelling has to be conveyed by the designers to the audience. So this takes a lot of room and time, and this is also a reason why we have so many different professions in our atelier. We have also content people, so people that are coming from dramaturgy or that are coming from literature and so on, who are able to read the brief and the content from a different, more content-orientated perspective. And after that, we do our own research beyond the research given to us by the curators. So, but we do not do research on the object and the history and the power of the object itself. So this mainly comes, at least in Europe, comes from the curators. What we do is we research the periphery. So, for example, if the object is coming from the 18th century or from the 19th century, like these scores, the opera scores, most of them were coming from the 19th century. We do research around circles, around the time, the social aspects, the political aspects, and the references to other professions or to other cultural fields, like literature, for example, like arts, painting, and so on. And you know, especially before the 19th century, during the 19th century also, and sometimes also today, many of the painters and sculptures had been inspired by music, yeah, or the compositions. And a speciality of ATELIER BRÜCKNER, especially of mine, is that I'm deeply exploring the content and the subject according to dramatic hints. So most of my concepts are based on a dramatic structure that I extracted from operas, from movies, from literature, from poetry. If there is a hint in the brief, or if there is a connection from the object side to other cultural fields, I try to pick it up and use it. For example, I give you an example. It's easier then, not so theoretically. When I read the reports of the survivors of the Titanic, so there were two reports collected, one in New York and one in London, of the naval courts there. And these reports were printed. This was one of the resources the curator Klaus-Göran Wetterholm shared with us when we started the design for the Titanic. But it was such a lousy copy of typewritten reports that I ignored it for many, many weeks. And every week, Klaus-Göran came up and said, listen, Uwe, you have to read these reports because it opens up your mind and you will understand the Titanic tragedy much better after you have read these reports. But they were so unattractive. And I always meant he wanted me to display these stupid copies, these unattractive copies. But I was wrong. And there was one night I couldn't sleep because I was so upset of this stress and panic that came up in the team because we were so late and the time period was so short for us to do the design. And as a compensation, not drinking alcohol, I started to read these reports. And then I tell you, I started reading at 1 o'clock in the night, and I couldn't stop till 10 o'clock in the morning. The entire team already was waiting for me. So 50 people were waiting for me for the daily brief, for the sure fix in the morning. And I missed the sure fix. I had about 20 phone calls on my smartphone because I couldn't stop reading. And these reports reminded me on something, on an experience I had years before, but I couldn't sort of remember precisely. Because in the reports, the people sitting in the same lifeboat, from first class and third class and crew members of the Titanic, were reporting completely opposite stories about what they experienced while the Titanic went down. It was crazy. In the same lifeboat, they had seen the same scenes around them, dying, crying, and dying people in the ice cold water. But the lady from the first class said, "Well, I didn't hear any voices, any cryings." And you know, the crew member, he said, since he heard these cries of the dying people, these struggling and fighting people that wanted to get into the lifeboat. Yeah, so the lifeboat was only equipped with 10–15% of its space because of the lady of the first class who refused to take more people swimming in the water on board. And these reports, these were so moving, they were so touching me that I couldn't stop reading. So at 10 o'clock, I attended the meeting. Everybody was extremely angry about me, and I was just asking all the other guys, listen, it reminds me on a movie that I don't know anymore the title and the director, but it's like the episodes told in these reports. And I think one day later it came to my mind that it was Rashomon. It's a movie directed by Akira Kurosawa, a Japanese director who became famous of his historic epic movies like Ran or The Seven Samurai. Yeah, so he was the first one to shoot this movie, Seven Samurai. But this movie, very few people only knew this movie, Rashomon, black and white, 1950s. And in there, one and the same story is told by 5 different protagonists in completely opposite way. And this was matching perfectly to the report I read in this night. So I redesigned the entire concept of the Titanic in 2 days and 3 nights, according to the dramatic structure of Rashomon. Is this an answer to you?
Thank you very much. It was incredibly clear. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
There are other 3 questions if you have time.
Of course I have time. It's reserved for you.
Fantastic.
It's solidarity teaching, Marco.
Okay. Fantastic. So the next one is from Vittorio. I don't know if Vittorio would like to express by himself. Vittorio, you are with us? I don't hear it. Otherwise, we can read it in the chat.
I just can read yes.
Yes, because today we perceive a desire to enjoy museum as something different from container buildings. Often they find themselves immersed in a historic center covering the role of important actors within the city. How can the museum and with which other institution enter more in everyday life of citizens? Can the museum offer spaces for the daily life of person, just the intersection of commercial function to achieve this purpose?
Yes, of course. I mean, what you have seen is, all the examples you have seen is ante-corona, before corona. So, and even I think it's quite a modern and brave approach to exhibition design, to create design out of the narrative, which only dates back to 20 years, I would say. Well, it started in the late 1990s, so maybe 30 years. Yeah, and before then it was a very erratic storytelling. So the objects were supposed to tell their stories by themselves, just by physical presence. And then the storytellers came, like me or Hermann Kossmann or Jürgen Steiner and others. Or not to forget, the father of modern scenography is François Coffinault, Swiss-born French designer who designed the film museum in Torino, for example. So I'm a great fan of him. I'm an admirer because he's a full-blood scenographer from early 1970s. Why do I tell you that? But because there is a development of modern scenography or storytelling in exhibitions, and till Corona, and it's based on a high volume of visitors in museums, which in many cases are bombed with thousands and millions of objects and are overwhelmed with content. Yeah, and there's almost no gaps to breathe, because the next convolute, the next collection is sort of breaking over you like a wave, because the tendency of the curators was to show as much as possible. It's also because they want to show their work. Fine, fair enough. But there was almost no space to reflect, and there was no extra spaces like in Titanic exhibition, which were just dedicated to the beauty or to the spirit of objects or to the spirit of the story. So this was new, and I'm very much intrigued and curious about what the post-Corona museum and museum concepts will look like. I think this is a chance to concentrate more on less than on more. Anyway, so if we stay in this hygienic requests of having a circular space of 1.5 or 2 meters around us, this is like a invisible, like a virtual cocoon that we are in. So imagine that each of us occupies a circle of 2 meters around us, with the intention not to touch the circles. Yeah. So if I sketch this quickly. So this is a post-war Corona situation. You have 3 visitors, and each of the visitors claims by order or by law a circle of 2 meters diameter around them, each of them. So that means that you cannot host 1 visitor per square meter or 1 visitor per 1.5 square meters in a regular exhibition as it was before Corona. Now you need 4 square meters per 1 person, or even more. So it's more like a expo pavilion where you automatically calculated 4 square meters per person to host all these big numbers of visitors. Now we don't have big numbers, or we will not have big numbers after Corona, but we need much more space for the individuals, which will automatically cause a different approach in scenography. And I hope for me, I'm quite happy of this effect, because I think this causes more reflection, and it offers more space for us designers and more space for the visitors to concentrate on certain aspects, objects, or storytelling. And the routing will play a major role in the future. Okay. Yeah, so I think there is more conducted routing than free flow, because otherwise you cannot control the flow of the visitors, and you cannot control that they behave in the way they should. Maybe they are so concentrated and they are so smart to respect the rules, and this is not a problem, but an advantage. Yeah, but I think the storytelling and the reception will gain more space just because of the new conditions. Is this the answer?
Thank you.
I think I only can read a selection of the chats.
Thank you, Uwe. There are again 2 questions. One comes from Nadira. Nadia, you are with us?
I'm here. Hello, Professor. Thank you very much for the very inspiring lessons. And I was ecstatic when you mentioned Kurosawa, as I am a very big fan of his works. I have a questions. With the historic or biographical or scientific contents, are usually narrated with the chronological or segmented chronological or maybe more complex and advanced approach. But I think with the work of art, I believe the process is different. And of course, the artist should be involved with the process. But how if the artist is already passed away? So maybe from your professional experience, how much or how far multidisciplinary exhibition designers or architect can intervene to synthesize a plot for the narrative? Or maybe there are any consideration in this kind of situations? Thank you very much.
Well, this is a complex question, and I try to make the answers easy. I think there are 3 partial answers for this question. First of all, there are different types of routes through the parcours. So the parcours is the entire surface and the entire accessible area of an exhibition. This is called parcours. The route is the way through. Yeah, so sometimes you have just one route through the parcours, sometimes you have many routes. So in a free flow arrangement, you have many options to find your way through an exhibition just by yourself. And the third is the so-called conducted one. So either it's a guided tour. So McKellen, you only can visit via a guided tour because it's too dangerous to go on your own. So this is quite clear. So the guide will lead you through the exhibition, and he or she will also have lots of influence on how you perceive it, because it's her kind of interpretation, it's her presence to present. So if you have the chance after Corona, the close down is opened, go to and you travel to Berlin, please visit Hohenschönhausen. So I will send it to you, or can I chat it? Can I chat it? Yeah. So the museum Hohenschönhausen, Berlin. Former Stasi prison. So, Stasi was the secret service of the German Democratic Republic. Very rude, very criminal, very cruel. So, there you have the option, you either can go free flow through the exhibition, but I recommend to go on a guided tour. Why? Because most of the guides had been former prisoners. More authenticity you can't gain. So imagine your guide through an exhibition is one who was tortured in one of the cells he is introducing you to. This is more than gooseskin. I've seen visitors crying there because the feeling was so intense. So this former prisoner was telling us the story how the Stasi agents were torturing him, the methods, and what he was feeling and how he was suffering. It was almost unbearable, I tell you. Some of the visitors left because they could not stand it, the feeling of what this guide was telling you. So this is a conducted, what I call a conducted route. Most of these different kinds of routing are more or less used or dedicated to historic museum, archaeological museum. Art museums they are very special. They differ from these social historic museums very much, because mainly the art museums are organized and arranged by the curators themselves. So they think that it's their property and their claim to set up the art, to combine the art, to do the scenography by placing the paintings, the sculptures, the spatial installation in a certain way. I've only done 3 art projects in my entire career. Only 3. Because usually we scenographers are not allowed or not invited, I would like to say invited, to do a scenography for art collections. This is mostly done by the curators themselves. But there is the possibility of scenography. So one of the protagonists is Hans-Dieter Schaal, a German designer, architect and stage designer. For a long time he was just working for theaters and doing the stage design for operas. So with Ruth Berghaus, for example. So Hans-Dieter, he was one of the very few who was very often invited to do the staging of arts, because he is also perceived as a curator. Yeah, so I'm also a curator. I did quite a bit curating, especially hosting the International Scenographers Festival in Basel and in Stuttgart. But this is a strange business, because most of the art museums perceive themselves in their self-reflection as something higher, more snobistic a field of exhibition compared to the historic museums, the social historic museums, the archaeological museums, and so on. But there is some good examples that unfortunately date back more than 10 years or 20 years, where there were curators collaborating with scenographers like Hans-Dieter Schaal or Jürg Steiner, for example, or Otto Steiner from Switzerland, who were involved in scenography dealing with art objects or artifacts. Yeah. Good. Oh, I didn't send it.
Thank you, Uwe.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
We didn't see what you have wrote, but if you send me the references by email, I transmit to the students.
Yes.
Because I know this Museum of Stasis, but I'm not sure about the exactly name. But
Yes,
if you send in my mail, I can transmit to students.
Yeah.
We got our two questions, one from Beatrice and the last one from Giovanni. Beatrice, è con noi?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Professor. I want to ask also, after what you have said basically right now, what is the relationship between modern, according to you, modern work of art and historical buildings? Because we have to work inside Palazzo Ducale in Mantova, which is a beautiful and an important historical container. So we cannot ignore the walls, the ceilings, the pavements, but with a modern, contemporary work of art by contemporary artists. So I think we will have to show both the work of art and the container. And I can refer to the work in Zurich by your atelier, which is the collection. And I saw that you create this dialogue between the object and the container. But in that case, we see also historical object. So it is a different case, and from here I'm curious about this topic. Thank you.
Yes. So yes, I think it's an increasing business, because there are so many historic buildings that have no real purpose or need refurbishment, and could host collections, also private collections, for example, modern art or art from Asia or from other continents, which have nothing to do with the objects at all. So the collections are coming from somewhere, or the subject or the content is coming from a different field. I know Palazzo Ducale quite well. I think I have visited 300 rooms of the 900, because this was the venue where we had our collaboration project, Marco and me and the students. I think, yes, it's possible, and you should not be too respectful to the old buildings. Yeah, my favorite quotation or my favorite recommendation is to go see, explore, and inhale Carlo Scarpa. So he's one of my heroes. Go to Verona, to the Castelvecchio, and you will see his interventions there. What he did was concrete, with iron, with bronze, and with other materials and designs, and how he respected the old building, but but included a new signature, a new spirit. It's amazing. I don't know how many times I visited the museum there, but every time I discovered a new detail. Yeah, and you also can go to Brioni, where he is buried.
Tomba Brion.
Yeah, Brion. Or you go to Treviso to the Gipsoteca, and you will find, or you go to Venice, Quirini Stampiglia. So there are many examples where you can learn from how he symbiotically, like a symbiosis, was working with the existing site and implementing a new signature, his signature. Yeah, very individual. So this is an example that you can refer on. There are some artists who had been doing temporary exhibitions. Some of these exhibitions stayed there for years, so semi-temporary or semi-permanent. This is Abramovich, who sort of created interventions in Vienna, for example, in the art museum, in the National Art Museum, and changed the perception, so the appearance and the perception of the visitors enormously. I mentioned already Hans-Dieter Schaal in Martin Gropius Bau in Berlin. So whenever you have the chance to travel to Berlin, visit Martin Gropius exhibition building. Actually, it hosts just 1/6 or 1/5 of a permanent exhibition, very far on the top, and the rest is all temporary exhibitions on 4 different levels. Yeah, so you will always find an exhibition that has to deal with the historic building and the implementation of an exhibition. So Olafur Eliasson's installation there in the Martin Gropius was sensational. So this might be a good advice. Also LMZ, of course, that you mentioned, our work there, focusing on the periodic rooms, or the historic rooms in the West Wing, where we tried to keep the character as much as possible. Actually, we were not allowed to do anything. The only chance to have very sophisticated, delicate intervention there was because of the restoration. So they dismantled the entire spaces and refurbished them and restored them, and then brought them back to their original rooms. Actually, the museum was built around this collection of rooms, and there we could sort of use the gaps between the installation and the building, and we could use the dismantling to find out where the sophisticated, very invisible installations could take place. And all the more obvious, like the mirror on the floor in one of the rooms, it's all removable. So you can take it out in 1 day or 2 days. And then the room is there as it was for 100 years. So there is a smart scenographic design that can both respect the original, authentic environment and implement a new design signature. And another example, of course, is François Confinot in Torino. So this is a historic building, and there are others. So there are more examples that you can find. I also will share a list of recommendable exhibitions and museums, and I will send it to Marco, and I'm sure that you will find some of them that could inspire you and let you be risky in terms to put your personal signature into the historic building. And by the way, most of this historic building had been refurbished several times during their life age. So this is actually, it's a bit, or it's quite a conservative behavior of most of the historians or of many of the curators who want to keep the Palazzo Ducale as it is at the moment. But actually it's not authentic anymore. Most of the rooms had been redesigned, over-designed, had been raped, yeah, or had been painted over like the famous frescoes in some of the rooms. So don't be shy with your concepts. Think of how to keep the character so that the building or the space or the room is still breathing, that you still can feel it, and implement your own idea. And it helps to think of that's only temporary. Good design will stay there for years, believe me. many of my concepts were supposed to only last 5, 7, maximum 10 years. So we have now 20 years anniversary. It makes me a bit proud, but on the other hand, it also tells you that even contemporary designs, if they are good, if they are fascinating, if the people love them, will stay much longer. So be risky. Yeah.
Thank you.
Challenge the old historic buildings.
Okay, we will. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And there is the last question from Giovanni.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, hi, Giovanni Bertini.
It's me. Well, my one is a bit more practical as a question, and is like, how do you define the amount of space that you should dedicate to a specific artwork? It's like it's a very specific thing and subjective things, and also like in my teammates, we are just in 4, but every one of us has a different like view on each piece of art, and which for him is like the most interesting one. So how we can combine our like 4 different ideas and like define the proper amount of space we should dedicate to each one of those art piece or whatever it will be like in the future. Thank you.
Well, I mean, this is a general question that can't be answered in a general way, because the art is so different and requires so different space and volume around it to make possible that the spirit of the art is really developing, and that the spirit of the art is taking over the intermediate or the larger environment around the piece of art. So I will give you some examples. There is a large one of the largest exhibition spaces I know is Dia Beacon in the north of New York. So it's a former production place. So this was abandoned halls that were bought or that were rented by a collector, or I think by a family who started to find a place for their artists, so for their artist friends to put their installations there. So James Turrell is there, and others. All arts that needs a lot of space around, yeah, and it was ideal for them to have these anonymous halls, long buildings, huge height to the ceiling, where you could use in a very diverse way. So you could only use the floors, you can put in a second floor and so on, or some of the larger sculptures needed more space around. So sometimes you need a distance just to capture the the spatial quality of a sculpture, like Richard Serra. Yeah. So if you go to Guggenheim Bilbao, the only really functioning, working exhibition space is dedicated to Richard Serra. It's just one huge hall for his sculpture. And if you go there, you will immediately feel that this room was dedicated to this sculpture. Yeah? Dia Beacon, Guggenheim Bilbao are typical examples for large format sculptures that sometimes only are in outdoor public places, like Serra is on this entrance plaza of the theatre and opera in Basel, very prominent. So Jean Tinguely is just in front of him. So he would be another artist who requires always a lot of space around his objects. Otherwise, they would not be able to develop their scent and their character and their spirit. Another aspect, for example, are installations that are focused or that are driven by light. So, for example, you need an absolutely black box to have the light beams or the projections coming from Ikeda. So these barcode projections on the floor and on the walls. You need a separate room by two means: by the character of the art, in this case Ikeda projections, and the sound. So imagine you have the sound connected to the installation. You need a closed room because otherwise the entire museum will suffer from the sound. And I also want to provide negative examples. So the Maxi in Rome by Zaha Hadid is a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe because you have one clap, pop, 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 and the echo wanders 3, 4, 10 times through the entire museum. This is not a museum, it's a sculpture. Yeah, so it's not an exhibition space. If you perceive it as a sculpture, as an architectural or spatial sculpture, fine. Yeah, but it cannot host exhibitions that need certain conditions, and you cannot choose the condition. The conditions are given by Zaha Hadid, and not by the demand of the art. For me, absolutely negative example. Yeah. So light, sound, atmosphere. Like so, there's an artist called Wolfgang Leib, very international renown. So he's collecting wax, bee wax, and he's collecting flowers, scents of flowers. For example, flower blossoms, yeah, and seeds. So he's doing large installations, collecting seeds from plants over, I don't know, 3 years, 5 years, and then he's using the color and the smell of the seeds to create fantastic spatial installations. But he needs extra space so that his art can develop its spirit. Yeah. So if you mingle this among paintings and sculptures or settings where kids are playing around and causing a lot of noise, this work will just disappear. It will be just not valuable. It would just not breathe. Yeah. So it depends on your intention as a scenographer. How you want to stage your art, if it's painting, if it's a sculpture, if it's a spatial installation. Rebecca Horn, for example, also a famous sculptor, very often is combining objects like violins that are played by a bow and then causing some movement of a pin that is writing on the floor or that is writing on the wall. I mean, if you are next to it, if you have an installation that is also emitting a demanding sound, you will destroy either the one or the other piece of art. So I think the same with art is listen to the art, explore it, try to find out the character, the spirit, behave as the art does. So put yourself in the position of the artifact. Treat the artifact like a character rather than a dead object, and you will find a solution. And maybe you need an extra space there, or you just close a couple of spaces for just this installation. So, you know, I deeply believe in the beat of a concept, the beat of a concept, like. Oh. So you can create a beat, and the beat is the dramatic structure. Or maybe the piece of art emits a beat, and you can use this beat. As several times you have heard music coming with the film, so very often the music was music that is used in the exhibition. It was not composed for the documentation. So maybe you can use this, or maybe an object sounds, or maybe it's an instrument, for example, that can be played, like in the Ricordi exhibition. Then I think it requires a different thinking, and it offers a different approach, scenographic approach. And why not dedicating a huge room or a hall for just one object? Why not? This is the second aspect I deeply believe in. It's the dramaturgy. So if your scenography is very equal, yeah, it's like passages in Moldau, yeah. It's always the same rhythm. It's always the same loudness. It's always the same smell. It's always the same kind of structure in your scenography. This is tiring. But if you have peaks and lows, yeah, in the installation, you will create awareness. Yeah. So you move the people around and you attract them from time to time. Then you de-accelerate them for a while in one room. There's very little, maybe just sound or a smell. And then the next room, you can fill up a room with 1,000 objects, and it's fascinating because the setting is so impressive. And then the next room has just one object. And you will see that the people concentrate on this object more than they did on thousands. So you also can create a rhythm in your setting.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. And always smile and smile. Don't forget to. I can't see your faces, but it's important that you keep, or that you create a certain relationship to the object or to the stories that you have to tell, that you want to tell. So treat them as a buddy, as one of your a flatmate or a colleague in your class. So just don't get trapped that you're dealing with dead things, because they all had a life, or they were all dedicated to a certain life, or there is a patina, there is a, in the pores, there is some stories hidden that only these objects can tell, or only this art can tell, or this kind of art provokes. Yeah, and then you automatically will find your scenography. I was never scared of finding a solution, because I deeply believe that the solution is already there. We just need to excavate it. This is form follows content. Even if it's a lousy briefing, if it's just done in half an hour, it's still, you can read between the lines and find something between the lines. So analyze your artifacts, and I'm sure that you will find an interesting, attractive solution. This is important. That's different to doctors. We don't need to save lives. We are on the entertaining side. So we enhance life. We don't need to save it. But with our designs, with our scenography, we create a surplus. We create new perspectives that had not been seen before or not been perceived before. This is our job. But if our design can save lives, even better.
Fantastic. So, Uwe, what could I say? Thank you so much for your lecture. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being so friendly with us. And I think has been a great day and a great occasion. And I always hear you with such an interest and pleasure. And I can only say to you, I hope to have another chance to meet you as soon as possible without the 2 meters of age surrounding us. And that's all. So I thank you again. Thank you so much for this fantastic day. And I say to you, bye-bye. We keep in touch and we see as soon as possible. And also thank you for to the students. And we meet each other again with the second part of this little slot about the exhibition design. So thank you to all of you, and thank you again. Bye-bye, Uwe.
Bye-bye, it was a pleasure.